Previously, as Jinwoo flew atop Kaisel, he observed the giant gate that had appeared in the skies above Korea, anticipating the greatest battle yet to come. The next day, inside the Hunter Association's gymnasium, Sung Jin-woo sparred against Beru. The ant soldier launched a flurry of attacks, his movements fast and precise, but not a single strike could touch Jinwoo. Since their last battle, Jinwoo had grown tremendously stronger. Blocking one of Beru's strikes with just a single hand, he asked whether Beru was truly giving it his all. The loyal ant lowered his head and admitted that he would never dare to fight his king with full force. Jinwoo smiled at the humility of his soldier. He explained that it was fine since all he wanted was to break a sweat, and Beru was the only one capable of helping him do that. At his command, the spar resumed. Beru lunged forward once more, but Jinwoo effortlessly avoided his claws. When Beru attacked again, Jinwoo countered with ease, and noted that his soldier had indeed grown stronger after being promoted to commander rank. Jinwoo then pointed out something important. In an army, there could only be one commander. He warned that once Igris and Greed advanced to general rank, it wouldn't be long before they would also have the right to challenge for the position of commander. If Beru wanted to keep his place, he would need to continue working hard. Motivated by his king's words, Beru pushed himself to the limit, striking with all the strength he could muster. But Jin Wu quietly thought to himself, it was still not enough. Even though Beru was the strongest among his shadow soldiers, he was still not strong enough to face the enemies that were coming. As Beru attempted a heavy strike, Jin Wu suddenly caught his arm and slammed him into the ground. While the ant struggled to rise, Jin Wu followed with a devastating punch to his ribs, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. Beru staggered back to his feet and humbly praised his master, expressing his amazement at Jin Wu's overwhelming strength. Jin Wu, half amused, joked that perhaps he should block the historical drama channels to stop Beru from learning such exaggerated speech. With the sparring session over, Jin Wu decided to clean up the aftermath. He contacted Chairman Wu Jinchul, asking him not to be upset since he had 300 ants who were quite capable of manual labor to handle the mess. The scene then shifted to another place, where Thomas Andre was standing with his assistant Laura. She asked whether they were planning to return to the United States. But Thomas, gazing up at the enormous gate above Korea, said that he couldn't possibly leave behind something so grand and awe-inspiring. Laura muttered that while it was certainly large, she wasn't sure she would call it beautiful. Thomas disagreed. To him, anything that stirred the heart was beautiful. The fire-breathing dragon, the massive gate, and the unmatched strength of Hunter Sung Jin Wu. All of it, he said, was beautiful. Besides, there were no gates currently appearing in the United States, so he felt no reason to return. Laura mentioned that the Hunter Bureau was worried, but Thomas brushed off their concerns. In his eyes, there was no safer place in the world than being near Sung Jin Wu. If the battle could not be won here, then there would be no future anywhere. That was why he wondered aloud whether this event marked the end of humanity or the beginning of something entirely new. The following day, people began evacuating the area around the massive gate. Meanwhile, at Jin Woo's home, his younger sister Jin A asked their mother why they were not leaving like everyone else. Their mother calmly explained that if this place was destined to become a battlefield, then it was better to choose where they would stay rather than flee aimlessly. Besides, their home did not fall within the official evacuation zone. Upset, Jenna protested. She argued that she was about to enter college, that she had looked forward to drinking freely, enjoying campus life, and living independently. Her life was only just beginning, and she did not want it to end so suddenly. Her mother smiled warmly at her frustration. She admitted that Jenna had a fair point, but assured her daughter that there was no need to worry. Sung Jin Woo would protect them, just as their father once had. The scene shifted back to Sung Jin Woo, who sat silently atop a tall building, gazing up at the colossal gate hanging in the sky. His thoughts grew heavy. Could he really close something like this without anyone getting hurt? He pulled out his phone, wondering who he would want to spend his final moments with if this battle truly became his last. Far away inside a quiet dojo, Cha Hai-in was training under the watchful eyes of her master. As she practiced her sword forms, the old instructor observed a slight hesitation in her movements. He voiced his concern, noting that fear seemed to be growing inside her strikes. Just as he was about to continue, her phone began to ring. She quickly went to answer it, and her master smiled, telling her that a hunter should never ignore their calls. After speaking briefly on the line, Cha turned back and explained that something urgent had come up. She bowed respectfully before leaving. Left alone, her master smiled knowingly to himself. Time passed, and the next scene showed Jin Wu and Hei In walking side by side through an amusement park. The crowd buzzed with excitement at the sight of the two famous hunters together. Jin Wu, looking around at the lively atmosphere, commented that there were more people than he had expected, given the looming threat of the gate. Hei In asked whether he liked places like this. Jin Wu admitted that he didn't particularly enjoy amusement parks, but he had always wanted to visit at least once. Curious, she asked why he chose to bring her here of all places. His answer was simple, because she was the only friend he had. Heian stopped for a moment, taken aback by his words. Jinwoo reminded her of the time inside the double dungeon, when she had called them friends in front of the architect. With a faint smirk, he mentioned that he had excellent hearing and caught every word back then. As she thought about it, Haiyan realized how quickly 2 years had passed since she first awakened as a hunter. For the first time in a long while, she felt lighthearted, enjoying a simple moment outside of battle. When she glanced at Jinwoo, she sensed something different, a presence, a scent, something uniquely his that set him apart from anyone else. Soon after, Jinwoo asked if she wanted to try everything the park had to offer. Smiling, she agreed. Seeing her expression, Jinwoo thought that perhaps he wasn't the only one who had always wanted to visit a place like this. But despite their efforts, the rides weren't as thrilling as they had hoped. Even the fake monsters scattered around the park trembled in fear at their overwhelming auras, ruining the experience. Eventually, they sat down to eat. Jinwoo noticed her quiet demeanor and asked if she was truly having fun. She insisted that she was, but he pressed further, pointing out that she hadn't screamed even once. Realizing that the rides must have felt too tame for an S-rank hunter, Jinwoo teased her, asking if it had all been boring. Hai-In reluctantly agreed. With a grin, Jinwoo suggested they try something truly exciting. Moments later, Kazel soared through the open sky with Jinwoo and Hai-In riding on his back. The wind rushed against them as the dragon cut through the clouds. Jinwoo asked how this compared. Hai-In's face lit up as she admitted it was fast, high, and breathtakingly beautiful. She laughed and wondered aloud why he had even bothered with the amusement park when he had such a magnificent ride at his disposal. Jinwoo's eyes softened as he explained that the park had been built on the very spot where his father had disappeared. He had wanted to visit it at least once, not for the rides, but to properly say goodbye. Haiyan looked at him warmly, touched by the depth of his words. She thanked him, telling him he had done nothing but show her kindness since the day they met. Jinwoo responded quietly that there was still one more thing he wanted to show her. The final scene revealed the two of them sitting beneath the open night sky, side by side as stars glittered above them. A shooting star streaked across the heavens, and in that fleeting moment, the world's chaos faded into silence. For a brief while, they shared peace together, an unspoken bond forming beneath the endless sky. The next day, a hunter walked down the street, lost in thought. He reminded himself that a massive gate was set to open within a few days. As a newly promoted B-rank hunter, he felt he couldn't afford to let his guard down. But as he walked, he bumped into a stranger. Irritated, he demanded the man stop. Not recognizing who stood before him, the hunter began to shout in anger. People nearby, thinking a fight was about to break out, started to gather around. The hunter puffed out his chest, declaring that he was now a B rank, a relatively high rank among hunters, and demanded an apology. But the stranger was no ordinary man. He was Rakan. Without a word, Rakan suddenly opened his jaws wide and bit the man's head off in a single savage motion. The crowd froze in horror. Gasps filled the street as hunters and civilians alike realized what they had just witnessed. Then Rakan released a surge of mana. The sheer force of his aura crushed everything around him, sending hunters flying through the air as debris shattered and scattered. His monstrous presence loomed over all. He declared to the terrified hunters that from this moment on, they would become his prey. His teeth and claws would tear through their fragile skin and flesh. Raising his voice, he announced his true identity. He was the king of beasts, the beast monarch. With arrogance, he dared anyone to try and stop him if they could. Meanwhile, in a quiet forest, Cha Hyen bent down to drink water from a lake. She looked up as Jin Wu approached her. He casually mentioned that he knew of a hotel nearby that served an excellent breakfast, suggesting they head there to wash up and have a proper meal. With a wave of his hand, he summoned Kaisel, preparing their departure. Back at the Hunter Association headquarters, Chairman Wu Jin-chul was being briefed on the sudden chaos. An agent rushed in, reporting that a monster was outside, viciously attacking every hunter in sight. Jin-chul asked immediately about the casualties. The agent replied that the numbers were still unclear, but the situation was dire. Frustration welled inside the chairman. By his calculations, there should still have been several hours before the dungeon break occurred. He was already overwhelmed managing the massive gate, and now a powerful monster had appeared without warning. He asked where Jin Wu was, but the staff member regretfully informed him that they had been unable to reach the hunter. Moments later, another agent burst into the room with an urgent update. A hunter capable of confronting the monster had appeared on the scene. Jin-chul asked if it was Jin Wu, but the man shook his head. Instead, he explained that it was a world-class hunter who had happened to be nearby. At the scene, Leonard Neumann stood face-to-face with the beast monarch. The German hunter narrowed his eyes, unsure if he could truly stand against such an enemy. Still, he thought perhaps fate had kept him in Seoul for this very reason, to challenge this monster. But before he could act, a massive hand grabbed his head and shoved him backward. It was Thomas Andre. Towering with unmatched presence, the American national-level hunter stepped forward. He told Leonard bluntly to stay out of the way, otherwise he would only become a burden. Back at a quiet restaurant, Jin Wu was sharing a meal with Cha Hyen when his phone began to ring. It was Chairman Wu Jin-chul, finally able to reach him after repeated attempts. The chairman asked urgently where he had been, explaining that no one had been able to contact him until now. Jin Wu replied calmly that he had been outside the service zone. Without delay, Jin-chul briefed him on the situation unfolding in the city. A powerful monster was rampaging in the middle of Seoul. Jin Wu asked how many enemies there were. The chairman answered, "Only one." That answer unsettled Jin Wu. He thought to himself that nearly every hunter in Korea was currently gathered in Seoul, preparing for the dungeon break of the gigantic gate. Yet all of them were being overwhelmed by a single magical beast that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Jin-chul added that an entire guild had already been wiped out in an instant when they tried to stop the monster. At that very moment, Thomas Andre was the one facing it head-on. Jin Wu's eyes widened. That didn't make sense. He had stationed shadow soldiers on Thomas Andre and the other top hunters. Those shadows were supposed to immediately report even the smallest disturbance, but when Jin Wu tried to connect to them, the signal was faint, weak, as though something was deliberately suppressing the shadows. The discovery left him both puzzled and concerned. Turning to Cha Hyen, he explained that there was a serious problem unfolding in Korea. She immediately asked if the dungeon break had already begun. Jin Wu shook his head. This was something else entirely. He quickly asked Chairman Wu for confirmation. They needed to know if the monster had a shadow. He stressed how important it was to confirm, because if it did, it could mean a colossal beast hidden within invisible shadows, something far worse than it appeared. Meanwhile, at the battlefield, Leonard Neumann called out nervously to Thomas Andre. Around them, hunters cheered with relief, shouting that the Goliath had arrived. Thomas, however, was irritated. He snapped at the hunters, ordering them not to waste time watching, but to focus on evacuating civilians. His eyes locked onto the beast before him. To Thomas, it looked like a wild animal that didn't understand its place. Both he and Rakan released immense amounts of mana, the clash of their auras shaking the air as the battle began. Rakan lunged at Thomas, but his attack had no effect. The American national-level hunter retaliated with a devastating punch, sending the beast monarch flying back. Thomas followed up with another heavy strike, but this time Rakan dodged. Just as the monarch prepared to counterattack, Thomas seized him and slammed him brutally into the ground. Elsewhere, Hunter Choi Jong-in arrived on the scene. He quickly asked for a status update, and another hunter explained that evacuation efforts were still underway. Both the Fiend Guild and the White Tiger Guild had already been dispatched to assist. As Choi sensed the battle raging nearby, his expression grew tense. Thomas Andre was holding back a mysterious magic beast, yet the aura radiating from the creature, it was even heavier, even more suffocating than the mana he had once felt during the Jeju Island raid. He couldn't help but wonder, what kind of monster could even the Goliath be fighting against? Back in the fight, Rakan was sent flying through the air, crashing violently into a nearby building after receiving a heavy blow from Thomas Andre. But that strike wasn't enough to put him down. The beast leapt back toward Thomas with frightening speed and landed a solid hit to his chest. The impact was powerful, yet Thomas managed to block it. Without hesitation, Thomas grabbed Rakan and slammed him into the ground. For a moment, it seemed the battle was over, until Rakan twisted his body and kicked Thomas in the face, launching him into the air. Thomas quickly regained his footing and began reinforcing his body with mana. The scene then shifted to the White Tiger Guild, who had just arrived at the battlefield. Guildmaster Baek Yoon-ho commanded his members to stay sharp and be ready for anything. But before he could finish, something massive flew past him and crashed into a building with thunderous force. As the dust cleared, Baek finally laid eyes on the magic beast that had been terrorizing the city. At the same time, Thomas had completely transformed into his reinforced state. He shouted to the White Tiger Guild, urging them to retreat and take cover. Baek studied the creature carefully. It was unlike any monster he had ever seen, clearly no ordinary beast. He considered transforming himself, but before he could act, Rakan suddenly appeared right in front of him. The pressure was suffocating. Instinct warned Baek not to move, not to draw attention, as if even being noticed would make him prey. Rakan ignored him and continued forward. With a flick of his power, he lifted dozens of cars into the air and hurled them at Thomas. But then something strange happened. Instead of being overwhelmed, Rakan felt himself being pulled closer. It was Thomas, dragging the beast toward him with sheer force. As Rakan closed in, Thomas slammed him into the ground and unleashed a relentless flurry of punches. Yet even as he struck, a disturbing thought ran through his mind. Something was wrong. A deep uneasiness filled him, the kind that whispered he might not win this fight. Rakan suddenly caught Thomas's fist mid-strike. Rising to his feet, the beast sneered, mocking the Goliath for being nothing more than a puppet of a fragment. He claimed he had seen enough of Thomas's petty tricks and demanded to know if the hunter was afraid. With that, Rakan launched a furious counterattack, forcing the hunters nearby to watch in horror. During the clash, Rakan noticed something unusual. Reaching into Thomas's shadow, he felt a presence, the mark of Jin Wu's soldier. With a cruel grin, he dragged out a shadow ant and crushed it in his hand, declaring that it was in his way. Then, gripping Thomas by the neck, Rakan taunted him. Since the hunter seemed so confident in his strength, he suggested they test it in a contest of raw power. With a surge of force, Rakan shattered Thomas's reinforced armor. But when the armor broke, he was stunned to see nothing inside. Thomas had slipped behind him. Grabbing the beast, the Goliath growled in fury and snapped Rakan's neck. For a moment, silence hung in the air. But then, before Thomas's eyes, Rakan's body regenerated completely, as if nothing had happened. The beast seized Thomas by the face and slammed him to the ground, mocking him further. He said he was beginning to feel hungry again. But before Rakan could act, a blast of mana struck him from behind. As the smoke cleared, Leonard Neumann stood there, trembling yet defiant. He declared that he wouldn't allow Rakan to do as he pleased. Just standing in front of Rakan sent shivers down Leonard's spine, but he refused to back down. Behind him, Thomas warned Leonard to run, insisting he would be killed if he stayed. But Leonard answered firmly. He knew the danger, yet he was still a hunter. In his heart, he accepted his fate. He told himself he would rather die with pride than live a meaningless life. Over and over again, he reassured himself that his choice was right. But as Rakan advanced, Leonard's confidence faltered. His expression twisted in despair as he muttered that perhaps this was the wrong choice after all. Just as death closed in, a shadow descended from the sky. Kaisel, Jinwoo's wyvern, swooped down and struck Rakan. The beast turned, catching sight of something in the air. It was Jinwoo. With blinding speed, he descended, landing a devastating kick to Rakan's head and slamming him deep into the ground. Jinwoo ordered Leonard to take Thomas to safety. Rakan slowly rose from the rubble, his eyes locking onto Jinwoo. With a grin, he remarked that the scent of the Shadow Monarch lingered on this human. Jinwoo studied him carefully. The killing intent rolling off Rakan was immense, but he wasn't alone. Behind Jinwoo, another presence materialized. It was Queresha, the Monarch of Plagues, who licked her lips and spoke eagerly. She wondered aloud what it would taste like to devour the body of another monarch. And then Psychos, the Monarch of Frost, emerged as well. The monarchs closed in, surrounding Jinwoo on all sides. Their combined mana could be felt from miles away, but Jinwoo did not back down. With a command, he summoned his entire army of shadow soldiers to charge. Psychos released a freezing breath, instantly trapping the soldiers in ice. He mocked Jinwoo, saying that his army couldn't even take a single step within this prison. Queresha sneered, accusing him of overstepping by daring to use such forces against monarchs. Psychos added that Jinwoo had yet to fully absorb Ashbourne's power. He admitted the original Shadow Monarch had been the greatest of them all, but reminded him not to underestimate the other monarchs. But in the next moment, Jinwoo shattered the ice, imprisoning his soldiers. The Frost Monarch's expression twisted in rage. Jinwoo pointed at him with burning determination and declared that no matter what happened, he would kill at least him. The battle escalated as the Frost Monarch, Silid, summoned towering ice golems to the field. Beside him, Queresha, the Monarch of Plagues, unleashed her own twisted powers, raising fallen hunters and forcing their corpses to march against Jinwoo. They swarmed him all at once, but Jinwoo moved too quickly for them to keep up. With effortless precision, he weaved through the attacks and leapt directly towards Silid. The Frost Monarch's eyes widened at Jinwoo's speed. But before the Shadow Monarch could land his strike, Rakan, the Beast Monarch, intercepted him mid-air. The two clashed with devastating force, exchanging blow after blow. Rakan sneered as his gaze fell on the blade in Jinwoo's hand. He mocked the hunter, scoffing at the idea that such a simple piece of metal could ever harm him. His confidence shattered instantly when Jinwoo swung and sliced clean through his hand. Jinwoo coldly remarked that he would have been right if it were just any ordinary piece of metal. Before Jinwoo could finish the fight, Queresha intervened, pulling Rakan to safety. In the distraction, the Beast Monarch calmly reattached his severed hand, his grin returning. Now Jinwoo found himself surrounded, not only by the three monarchs but also by their countless minions. At that moment, a sudden crack echoed through the frozen battlefield. One of Jinwoo's shadow soldiers had broken free from Psychos' prison of ice. It was Baru. The Ant Commander let out a piercing cry of rage as his eyes locked on Queresha. Furious that she had dared to lay a hand on his master, Baru charged straight for her. Both Silid and Rakan faltered in shock. They could hardly believe that a commander class being like Baru was under the control of a mere human. Queresha smirked at first, raising her hand to strike. She mocked him, saying a child who refused to acknowledge his mother deserved to be punished. But when her powers collided with Baru's claws, she was overwhelmed. His strikes tore through her abilities, leaving her momentarily stunned. Baru dropped to one knee before Jinwoo, declaring that his master had fought evenly even against beings of a superior species. As always, Jinwoo's strength surpassed his expectations. The Plague Monarch's minions swarmed forward, but Jinwoo and Baru fought side by side, cutting them down with unmatched ferocity. Just as the tide began to shift, Queresha struck from behind. Her ambush sent Baru crashing aside and landed a crushing blow on Jinwoo, blasting him into the ruins of a building. Before he could recover, Silid rained down a barrage of ice projectiles. Buried in the rubble, Jinwoo rose to his feet, blocking the onslaught. The Frost Monarch mocked him, demanding to know how much longer he could endure under their relentless attacks. But Jinwoo's response was decisive. In a blur of motion, he drove his blade straight into Psychos' chest, piercing his heart. Cold determination filled his voice as he declared that the Frost Monarch would not leave this battlefield alive. Furious, Silid ripped the weapon from his body, bellowing in outrage that a mere human dared speak such words to a monarch. Jinwoo noted grimly to himself that even a strike to the heart wasn't enough to kill them. Without hesitation, he moved to strike again. But this time, Rakan appeared behind him. With brutal speed, the Beast Monarch slashed across Jinwoo's back, drawing blood. Seeing their liege wounded, Baru's rage spiraled out of control. He prepared to charge again, but before he could, Queresha appeared behind him. With a sickly smile, she introduced herself as the Monarch of Plagues, the mother of every insect in existence. Wrapping her twisted energy around Baru, she whispered that even if he was an ungrateful child who no longer recognized his mother, she would still embrace him. Meanwhile, Jinwoo was on his knees, battered from Quresha's brutal assault. The monarch sneered at his weakened state, declaring that this was the end. At that moment, Baru cried out to the Shadow Army, demanding why they were standing idle and urging them to rush forward to protect their master. Answering his call, greed shattered the ice that bound him. With his claws gleaming, he declared that he would be the one to claim the enemy's final breath. Silid, the Monarch of Frost, took note of Greed's emergence, remarking that he must have been an extraordinary warrior in life to possess such power, even as a shadow. Silid warned the others that Jinwoo's strongest soldiers were beginning to break free. Soon after, Tusk, Igris, and Iron tore through their icy prisons, their dark forms emerging one after another. Witnessing this, Silid turned his focus back to Jinwoo, preparing to strike. He declared that Jinwoo's wounds were fatal and that playtime was over. Yet Jinwoo smirked as he slowly rose to his feet. Both monarchs froze in shock as they realized his injuries had vanished, erased completely by his status recovery skill. Across the world, the battle was being broadcast live, leaving humanity in awe. The city had become a war zone as monarchs and shadows clashed with earth-shaking force, their battle erasing everything in their path. From a distance, Leonard Neerman could only watch in horror, overwhelmed by the sight before him. Meanwhile, Thomas Andre, barely regaining consciousness after being healed, asked Leonard about the situation. Leonard's voice trembled as he explained that it felt as though he was witnessing the end of the world. Among the observers was Hunter Bak Yunho. His eyes were locked on the battlefield, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. He wondered aloud if the Sung Jinwoo before him was the same man he once knew. Though he had always understood Jinwoo's potential for growth, the scale of power Jinwoo had achieved in such a short time left him stunned. Back on the battlefield, Jinwoo pressed forward with his shadow army at his side. Together they overwhelmed the monarchs, their relentless assault outpacing even the monarch's formidable regeneration abilities. Enraged, Quresha found herself pushed back as Baru relentlessly tore into her, forcing her into a corner. Furious, she resolved to put an end to him. But before she could strike, Jinwoo appeared at her side. He recalled the prophecy the architect once revealed, that he would meet his end beneath the pillar of flames that supported the world. Yet as he stood before Quresha, he reflected that the prophecy never stated whether that pillar would truly fall. His words carried a weight that unsettled the monarch. Elsewhere, Lim Tegyu, guildmaster of the Fiend Guild, observed the battle from atop a nearby building. He had been waiting, his sniper rifle prepared, yet hesitation lingered. He admitted to himself that this was not a battle he could intervene in. For 30 long minutes, his assassins had been stationed across the city, ready to provide covering fire the moment he gave the signal. But the grim truth gnawed at him. Even if they joined the fray, how many of them would survive? If Thomas Andre himself had failed against these monsters, what hope did they truly have? As Lim wrestled with the decision, a hand suddenly reached out from behind, placing itself firmly on his shoulder. A voice told him to simply sit back and watch. Startled, Lim spun around, demanding the stranger's identity, only to be left speechless by the sight of the person standing before him. All the while, countless hunters who had gathered with hopes of subjugating the beasts could only stand by helplessly. None dared to approach the battleground. All they could do was wait for the dust to settle, knowing that their strength meant nothing in the face of the clash unfolding before them. Back on the battlefield, Jinwoo managed to land a decisive strike on Quresha, but the Monarch of Plagues was far from defeated. Her body quickly began to regenerate, restoring itself with horrifying speed. She retaliated, unleashing a wave of poison that spread across the field. A system notification confirmed what Jinwoo already sensed. Venom still lingered thick in the air. Yet he remained calm, for poison held no effect on him. This realization enraged Quresha. With fury in her voice, she charged toward him, determined to tear him apart. Before she could finish her attack, however, she felt her body being dragged against her will. Jinwoo was pulling her closer with overwhelming authority. Struggling against the force, she realized that she could not undo it. Her body was pinned down, helpless beneath his control. In that moment, Jin Wu unleashed his skill, mutilation. His power ripped through her, and her form began to break apart, dissolving into the air itself. As her existence faded, Qureisha accepted the inevitable. She reflected that even beings born from darkness were humbled before a greater, deeper darkness. With that final thought, her body scattered into nothingness. A notification appeared before Jinwoo, declaring that the Monarch of Plagues had been defeated. The other monarchs looked on in disbelief. Silid, the Frost Monarch, muttered that such a feat should have been impossible. Jinwoo was not supposed to be capable of wielding the Shadow Monarch's power to its fullest. Rakan, the Beast Monarch, agreed but remained unfazed. He assured his ally that Jinwoo was still incomplete, his strength not yet perfected. To prove his point, Rakan seized Baru by the throat. With cruel amusement, he explained that Jinwoo's reliance on such small creatures showed how incomplete he truly was. An unfinished monarch, Rakan said, could never stand in the way of true monarchs. Baru's body began to break apart, his existence crumbling under the Beast Monarch's grasp. Jinwoo realized in horror that Rakan was severing the connection between him and his shadow, the same way he had once removed the shadow binding Thomas Andre. Desperate, Jinwoo attempted to cancel the summon, commanding Baru to return. But a chilling notification appeared before him. The subject could not be retracted. Acting instantly, Jinwoo struck at Rakan, forcing him to release Baru. He quickly recalled his soldier, relieved to have prevented Baru's complete erasure. But his relief was short-lived. The Frost Monarch stepped forward, his body shifting as he transformed into his true form. Silid declared that Jinwoo's ability to control shadows meant nothing if the connection could be cut. His plan was to trap Jinwoo's soldiers beneath layers of ice, forcing them into a cycle of destruction and regeneration. By doing so, they would become nothing more than parasites, draining Jinwoo's mana until he was powerless. He unleashed his authority, encasing the battlefield in ice and preparing his assault. Jinwoo braced himself, but Silid was merciless. He slashed at Jinwoo, wounding his arm, then lifted him and slammed him into the ground with crushing force. Yet Jinwoo endured. He burst from the rubble and retaliated, striking at the monarch. Silid dodged and countered with terrifying speed, launching Jinwoo backward. Jinwoo steadied himself, but he quickly realized how fast his opponent was. The Frost Monarch studied him carefully, noting that his stealth ability must burn through enormous amounts of mana. With cold certainty, he lunged forward, vowing to end the battle quickly. Their clash shook the air. Jinwoo analyzed every movement, thinking that he could read Yogamun's attacks but lacked just enough speed to close the gap. Determined, he pushed harder. The monarch scoffed, dismissing Jinwoo's efforts, and summoned waves of ice magic. But by then, Jinwoo had already slipped behind him. For a moment, Jinwoo believed he had finally gained the upper hand, but Silid only smirked. Something was wrong. Observers all around the battlefield froze in shock, their eyes widening in horror. Even Leonard Neerman could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Behind Jinwoo, the Beast Monarch had appeared. Rakan struck with ruthless precision, driving his massive claws through Jinwoo's chest. Mocking him, Rakan declared that Jinwoo was nothing without the speed he so relied on. Jinwoo looked down at the claws piercing his body as his daggers slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground. Yet even in this dire state, his thoughts remained defiant. His level had risen again, he reminded himself. Compared to that growth, such wounds were nothing. The Frost Monarch picked up one of Jinwoo's fallen daggers. With icy cruelty, he plunged it back into Jinwoo, mocking him as he asked whether Jinwoo could heal as he had before. He reminded him that he was still incomplete, not yet a true monarch, and demanded to know if this was as far as he could go. With the entire world watching the broadcast, Silid proclaimed what awaited humanity. Once the monarch army set foot in this world, human corpses would rise in mountains, and rivers of blood would flow endlessly. Yet he had a different fate planned for Korea, the land Jinwoo called home. He vowed to personally freeze every man, woman, and child. They would endure eternal agony, trapped in bodies that could neither die nor truly live. Their suffering, he declared, would become his joy. As his icy power consumed Jinwoo, The hunter's body froze, and his vision dimmed. He told himself he only needed to endure a little longer. Then a chilling notification appeared. His HP had dropped to 0. The player had died. But in that very instant, another message appeared. The system declared that the player possessed the Black Heart and had fulfilled the conditions for a passive skill. The skill activated. The battlefield was suddenly engulfed in radiant light. Jinwoo's eyes slowly opened. He found himself lying in a hospital bed, his mind clouded by confusion. Sitting up, he began to panic. Memories of the brutal battle with the Monarchs came flooding back. The Beast Monarch's claws, the Frost Monarch's dagger piercing his chest. He thought to himself, had all of that been just a dream? He clearly remembered the sensation of his heart being pierced. Yet somehow he was still alive. The door opened, and Wu Jinchul entered the room alongside another man. They asked if Jinwoo had regained consciousness. Startled, Jinwoo looked at them and immediately asked what had happened to the Monarchs. He even called him Chairman Wu, demanding to know how he had survived. Wu Jinchul froze at the words. He calmly corrected Jinwoo, explaining 3 things. First, he was not the chairman, but the chief inspector of the surveillance team. Second, he needed to ask Jinwoo about the strange moving statues. And third, he wanted to know how Jinwoo already knew his name. Jinwoo was stunned. None of this made sense. Wu Jinchul continued, saying that when they had arrived at the scene alongside the White Tiger Guild, everything was already over. But Jinwoo shook his head. This wasn't what he was talking about. The more he listened, the more Jinwoo realized something impossible had happened. Somehow he had traveled back in time. Wu Jinchul, sensing his confusion, asked if he was all right. Jinwoo told him he simply needed time to process everything. Checking his status window, Jinwoo was shocked to see that nothing had changed. His stats and inventory remained exactly as they were before. Even Kamish's wrath was still in his possession. Just then, a familiar voice called out. His sister, Jin Wu, entered the room, scolding him for not resting. She asked if he had hit his head in the dungeon too. Looking him over, she frowned in confusion. She even questioned if she had entered the wrong room, asking who he was. Jinwoo realized she didn't recognize him because his appearance had gradually changed in the future. Jinna hesitated, staring at him. Was this really her brother? He looked so different, taller and far more mature. Jinwoo brushed it off, telling her it was probably her imagination. He stood and told her he was busy. He needed to head to the Hunters Association. When Jinna asked why, he replied that he planned to give up being a hunter. Before leaving, he told her to go back to school, knowing she had skipped class to check on him. He then turned to another girl nearby, Han Song-yi, and firmly told her not to even think about giving up her studies to become a hunter. Han Song-yi was stunned. How did he know her name? Jinwoo pulled his hood over his head as he left. His thoughts raced. He no longer had his shadow army. He would need to rebuild it from scratch. None of this made sense. Arriving at the association, Jinwoo requested a re-evaluation of his rank. The staff whispered in awe. He was the first S rank to appear in 2 years, but even with their device, they couldn't measure his magical power. Jinwoo interrupted, saying that before the test was repeated, he wanted to meet the chairman. Though the staff offered to guide him, he walked away, stating that he already knew where the office was. The employees were left whispering among themselves. How could an outsider possibly know the location of the chairman's room? While riding the elevator, another man stood beside Jinwoo. His name was Kang Tae-sik, and he was deep in thought. He wondered what kind of excuse he should prepare this time. It wasn't his first time lying to the association, but if he ever got caught by Chief Inspector Wu, he would be in serious trouble. Then, without warning, Jinwoo spoke to him. He revealed that Tae-sik possessed a stealth ability, yet had failed to report it. Startled, Tae-sik reached for his weapon, demanding to know how Jinwoo could possibly know that. Jinwoo calmly warned him. In the near future, someone would ask Tae-sik to avenge their daughter. Jinwoo didn't care how he handled criminals, but if Tae-sik ever harmed innocent hunters in the process, Jinwoo himself would kill him. "This is my first and final warning," Jinwoo said. Shaken to his core, Kang Tae-sik nervously asked who Jinwoo truly was, but Jinwoo only walked away, leaving him speechless. "He's like a ghost," Tae-sik muttered. Jinwoo finally entered the office of Go Gun-hee, the association's chairman. His eyes softened. It had been so long since he had last seen him alive. Jinwoo greeted the chairman, who remarked that coming straight to him after a test result suggested Jinwoo was already familiar with the procedure. He sensed Jinwoo's heavy emotions and gently asked if he was all right. Jinwoo brushed it aside, insisting it was nothing. Interrupting the formalities, Jinwoo made a bold request. He proposed that the regulations be changed so that summoned creatures could be officially counted as raid members. In exchange, Jinwoo promised something incredible. He would go to Jeju Island and personally exterminate the ants. He was shocked. He reminded Jinwoo of the countless failed raids and the hunters who had died there. He warned him not to speak so recklessly, but as he looked at Jinwoo more closely, he was overwhelmed by the vast mana radiating from him. Jinwoo stated with calm certainty that this was something only he could accomplish. He would take care of the ants. The chairman was left speechless, realizing that Jinwoo's power already far exceeded even that of a national-level hunter. A sequence of Sung Jinwoo's past adventures began to flash before his eyes. He saw himself saving Li Juhi during the early days, surviving the deadly Red Gate incident, and defeating the High Orcs. He remembered turning Tusk into a shadow soldier, freeing his mother from her eternal slumber, and finally the Jeju Island raid, where he defeated Baran and transformed the insect monsters into shadows. But then, Jinwoo frowned. Something wasn't right. He clenched his fists and shouted into the void. "Enough! Stop this! I know this is nothing but an illusion. Show yourself." At that moment, the fabricated world shattered like glass. Above him, the illusion collapsed, and Jinwoo suddenly found himself surrounded by countless system notifications, each asking the same chilling question. Do you wish to restart the world? Confused yet determined, Jinwoo demanded to know who was behind all of this. Finally, an entity revealed itself before him. Jinwoo's eyes widened in recognition. It was the King of the Dead. The sovereign spoke with calm authority, offering Jinwoo a tempting proposition. He could remain here forever, living inside this world as though it were an endless dream. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes. So, what you're suggesting is that I allow myself to be trapped inside this false reality you've created. The King of the Dead shook his head. No, I didn't create this. You did. This world was born from your own desire to correct the mistakes of your past, fueled by my power. In other words, this domain is mine. This is eternal rest. This is death. His voice echoed like a funeral bell as he continued. I have been watching you longer than you could ever imagine. You who always walked closest to death, yet resisted it with everything you had. I am the record of your struggles, the proof of your defiance, and the reward for your suffering. I am you. The King of the Dead explained that within this territory, Jinwoo held limitless power. He could turn the monarch's own servants into shadows, absorb their strength, and even alter reality itself, though only inside this domain. Jinwoo raised his voice again. So you're saying you and I share the same power? The figure nodded slowly. I have waited an eternity for this moment. I am the Shadow Monarch, the administrator of the deepest darkness. Jinwoo's next question carried both suspicion and curiosity. Then why was I chosen? The Shadow Monarch's answer was chilling. I shall show you our beginning, our end, and your true beginning. The perspective shifted back to the battlefield in the real world. Sung Jinwoo's body was frozen by the power of the Monarch of Frost. Observing him, the Monarch of Beastly Fangs muttered coldly, "He's dead for sure." Meanwhile, Thomas Andre informed Leonard Newman that Jinwoo's presence had vanished. Upon hearing this, Hunter Baek Yunho refused to believe it. That's impossible. If he's truly gone, then there's no one left who can stop those beasts. From atop a building, Lim Tig-yu clenched his teeth in regret. I shouldn't have listened to that person earlier, he thought. Looking down at the horde of magical beasts, he wondered if bombardment could still stop them. Finally, he decided, prepare to fire. We'll unleash everything we have on my signal. Our target is that beast that resembles a White Walker. But just as the hunters prepared their attack, something changed. Within the prison of ice, Jinwoo's body began to radiate a massive surge of mana. The Monarch of Frost's expression hardened in shock as he noticed Jinwoo's heart, black as night, burning with dark flames. Both the Monarch of Frost and the Monarch of Beastly Fangs realized what was happening. Their voices rose in alarm. "We must stop him! We cannot allow the true king to descend now that the false king is gone." They charged straight toward Jinwoo, determined to strike him down before it was too late. But in that moment, before their attacks could land, an overwhelming force intervened. The beastly monarch was suddenly struck in the face, sent crashing into the Frost Monarch. Both were hurled across the battlefield, smashing into a nearby building. As the dust settled, a towering figure appeared before Jinwoo's frozen body. His presence radiated a power that dwarfed even the monarchs. Looking down at the fallen sovereigns, he declared in a thunderous voice, "None shall lay a hand on this child." A new vision unfolded, reaching back into the deepest memory of the world. In ancient times, an absolute being tore reality into two halves, light and darkness, and shaped from them emissaries and sovereigns. From those shards were born 8 great monarchs, emissaries meant to preserve the world, and sovereigns destined to unmake it. Those two forces clashed without mercy. Whole armies bled away as emissaries and sovereigns slaughtered each other in an unrelenting war. Exhaustion and despair settled over the battlefield, and at last the brightest of the light fragments could no longer remain silent. It stepped forward to the Absolute and demanded an answer. Why did the Absolute ignore the screams of the countless soldiers who died for its purpose? It begged the Absolute to lend its strength so they might fight on in the Absolute's name. The Absolute did not answer. That silence revealed the truth. To the Absolute, the war was merely sport, something to watch, not to stop. The fragments finally understood that so long as the Absolute existed, their suffering and the conflict itself would never end. If they continued to obey, only death waited for them. Faced with that futility, the brightest fragment and those who followed drew their swords. Thus the rebellion began. The vision tightened, and the monarch who stood before Jinwoo pointed into the past. "That is me," he said. He explained that he had stood alone against the uprising of his fellow emissaries. His forces were small and outmatched. Defeat seemed certain. Then in the blackness between moments, he discovered something the Absolute had buried within him, a hidden power that answered his desperate will. From that day, the Shadow Monarch was born. With this new gift, he returned to the field. He raised the fallen, restoring his soldiers from death itself, and led them back into the fray. But by the time he returned, events had already taken a darker turn. The remaining brilliant fragments had slain the Absolute and assumed its authority, calling themselves the rulers. Wielding tools and artifacts infused with the Absolute's power, the rulers turned on the monarchs. They hunted the sovereigns down, the king of giants, Legia, was captured, and the balance of power collapsed. Seeing the magnitude of the threat, the monarchs had no choice but to unite. The Shadow Monarch reached out to them, and old enemies formed a fragile alliance to face the new common enemy, the rulers. From that moment on, he fought not as a simple emissary or a fragment, but as the Shadow Monarch, gathering the remnants of armies left on the battlefield into a single shadow host. When he linked his forces with the army of destruction, led by the warring Dragon King, the ruler of berserk dragons, even the rulers began to fear him. Fear, however, bred treachery. 2 monarchs who came to dread his growing power betrayed him. Their betrayal tore his ranks apart and nearly annihilated the Shadow Army. In the chaos, the Beast Monarch abandoned his soldiers and fled, while the White Flame Monarch, Baron, paid with his life. Then the rulers descended from the sky. They surrounded the Shadow Monarch and, to his astonishment, dropped to their knees and begged for forgiveness. They claimed there was no longer reason to fight. Though they possessed the power to erase him on the spot, they chose to spare him, an act that, if nothing else, carried the weight of respect. He had stood at their side on the front lines, fighting while commanding the army of brilliant light. But the Shadow Monarch could not forget what had happened. Turning to those who now begged him, he asked in a voice that hardly concealed his pain, had they not once raised their blades against his liege? Their answer was blunt. The slain had been their master as well. Anger flared in the Shadow Monarch. If their former lord had been master to them too, then their betrayal was all the more unforgivable. One of the fragments tried to explain. They had rebelled because they wanted to end the war, to stop the endless slaughter. They pleaded that they had acted for a higher purpose. The Shadow Monarch did not soften. He challenged them with one final terrible proposal. If they truly desired the end they had sought, then finish it. Pierce his heart with their spears and claim the conclusion they begged for. Let him be the end that would make them victors at last. But the fragments recoiled from such a fate. Instead of driving their spears home, they dropped their weapons and fell before him, begging for mercy and surrounding him in a show of contrition. They bowed and offered their respect, asking him to forgive what they had done. The Shadow Monarch told Jinwoo that he had been overwhelmed and found no way to break the cycle, so he chose to withdraw and bide his time for vengeance. While hiding, he carried within himself the Monarch of White Flames, a sealed power he intended to unleash once he had recovered enough strength to strike back at the Beast Monarch's forces. But things had not gone as he planned. The other monarchs, already weakened from endless war, were crushed by the rulers while he lay in hiding. When he finally reappeared before those who had fled into the gaps between dimensions, conflict did not reign. The Dragon Monarch forbade any fight. He understood that the monarchs needed time to rebuild, and so he welcomed the Shadow Monarch into their ranks. Together they began searching for a new world where they could rebuild their armies. When Jin Wu asked if the monarch meant Earth, the Shadow Monarch confirmed it and revealed images of ruined cities. Jin Wu recognized one scene immediately, the Demon Castle, and wondered whether the vision showed what would happen in the future. The Shadow Monarch corrected him. It was not the future, but a recording of the past. He explained that the rulers had once been slow to detect the monarch's movements. By the time the rulers arrived, the monarch's destruction was already complete. Furious, the rulers resorted to a forbidden artifact, the Cup of Reincarnation, an instrument empowered by the Absolute that could rewind time by 10 years. In desperation, the rulers sacrificed everything to undo their mistake. Even so, the current Earth was far too fragile to endure a full-scale clash between monarchs and rulers. Regardless of which side won, the planet itself would have been devastated. Faced with that cost, the rulers made a grim choice. If they could not save everyone, they would at least preserve a remnant so life could continue. To that end, they set out to create humans capable of surviving such cataclysms. Hunters designed to stand between the world and annihilation. Jinwoo, piecing things together, realized that the Demon King's apparition was a shard of the Shadow Monarch's memories and asked if the world had already suffered endless cycles of destruction. The Shadow Monarch confirmed it. While supreme beings could not rewrite the flow of time, they could perceive the changes made by the Cup of Reincarnation. Now the Cup's power was exhausted and unusable. Jinwoo asked how that could be. The Shadow Monarch answered that the Cup, like all power, had limits. Even the Absolute could be destroyed by its creations. The monarchs had been made to fight and were strong enough to overthrow their creator. The fragments had turned on the Absolute, just as humans can be undone by the tools they forge. The monarchs soon realized they could not face the rulers head-on, so they adopted a strategy similar to their enemies. Just as the rulers had bestowed fragments of their strength upon humans to fight against magical beasts, the monarchs devised their own plan. They would descend into the human world by borrowing mortal bodies as vessels. Through this method, they could appear much earlier than the rulers had anticipated, bringing their armies with them. Their ultimate goal was to transform Earth itself, now overflowing with magical energy spread by the rulers, into a colossal battlefield and trap. But there was one major problem. To become vessels for monarchs, human bodies needed to withstand enormous power. And among all mankind at that time, there were none capable of containing the might of the Shadow Monarch or the Monarch of Destruction. The strength of these two beings far surpassed that of their counterparts, and no vessel yet existed that could endure them. That was when a brilliant mage in the Dragon Monarch's service, the Architect, stepped forward with a solution. He offered to find a suitable host, but in return demanded a perfect, imperishable vessel. Because no natural body could hold death, the Architect designed a system to search the human race for an individual with a rare combination of traits: a keen sense for magic, exceptional physical potential, indomitable spirit, and iron mental resilience. He built games and simulations to probe human limits and discover the one person who could match a monarch's power. The system eventually identified someone who shattered expectations. Jinwoo himself. Though he had always seemed weak and repeatedly skirted death, he survived where many would have perished. The architect's algorithm was outmatched. Even he could not predict what Jinwoo would become. The Shadow Monarch told Jinwoo plainly he had watched him, even against the architect's intent, and had chosen him. The Shadow Monarch described himself as the record of Jinwoo's struggles, the living proof of his defiance, and the reward for his pain. Jinwoo asked whether, even so, he had been insufficient to contain the Shadow Monarch's power. The Shadow Monarch explained that the architect tailored the system to Jinwoo's human skills and preferences. Games and trials that would both entertain and strengthen him. The system, powered in part by the Shadow Monarch's own energy, slowly leveled Jinwoo up until his body could approach the needed threshold. Why had the Shadow Monarch betrayed the architect and the rulers? Jinwoo pressed. The monarch admitted he had debated loyalties and finally made a choice. He refused to stand with the rulers. He had hidden instead because he could not bear to lose what he had found in Jinwoo. Over time, their identities had fused. The Shadow Monarch became Jinwoo, and Jinwoo became the Shadow Monarch. Ownership of the body, the monarch said, had become irrelevant. They had become one. He then gave Jinwoo a choice. He could remain inside the domain of death, an eternal dreamscape crafted from Jinwoo's desires, and live forever in that endless reverie. Or he could return to reality, to a world where enemies still waited and battles were not yet finished. Jinwoo answered without hesitation. This place was not where he belonged. The Shadow Monarch smiled and began to walk away. When Jinwoo asked if this would be their last meeting, the monarch replied that he would return to his rest. Jinwoo, now the new Shadow Monarch in truth, would live on in an imperishable state. The chances of their paths crossing again were slim. The monarch added that, with Jinwoo's death, his power had become absolute. And then Jinwoo cut him off, saying simply he already understood. The Shadow Monarch gave a final, knowing smile and told him the truth plainly. Because I am you. Meanwhile, the Frost Monarch Solid and the Beast Monarch Rakan stood frozen as they witnessed Sung Jinwoo's rebirth. Before them appeared a glowing entity, one of the fragments of brilliant light, protecting the human vessel at the center of this catastrophe. The monarchs demanded answers. Was the fragment truly willing to bring disaster upon this world with his own hands? Was he risking everything to help the Shadow Monarch return? But with no time left, Rakan urged Scylla to act. They moved to strike, while the fragment readied himself to buy Jinwoo just enough time to awaken. In a flash, battle erupted. Scylla lunged forward with his trident, but the fragment slipped aside with ease. Rakan dove down from above, claws outstretched, yet his target vanished again, reappearing behind Scylla to drive a blade into his shoulder. Shocked, Scylla realized their opponent was reading his movements, adapting to his attacks in real time. Rakan noticed it too. The fragment fought like a veteran of countless wars, avoiding every frost technique while parrying each of his assaults. As Rakan pressed forward, Scylla attempted to freeze their enemy in place, but once again the fragment proved faster. With a brutal kick to the chin, he sent the Frost Monarch crashing into a nearby building. Rakan seized the opening, charging with jaws wide to rip the fragment apart, but instead pain exploded through him as the light pierced his face. An elbow followed, slamming into his ribs and hurling him backward. Roaring in fury, Rakan ripped the weapon free, vowing to tear the fragment apart. But even as he spoke, his body trembled. The reason became clear. From behind them surged an overwhelming tide of mana, terrifying in its weight. Rakan instinctively leapt back, putting distance between himself and that unfathomable power. Recovering, Scylla declared the fragment's tricks would not work again, then ordered Rakan to continue attacking. But Rakan refused. The air itself was crying, he said. The Shadow Monarch was coming. Opening a portal, he announced he would go no further. Scylla shouted in disbelief, accusing him of cowardice and betrayal. But Rakan answered coldly. His promise was only valid while Jinwoo remained human. With the true monarch awakening, he had no reason to stay. As he vanished through the portal, he left Scylla with one final remark, that he could never understand the terror of facing the Shadow Monarch's real power. Enraged and abandoned, Scylla chose to fight alone. Slamming his trident into the ground, he unleashed his full strength. A monstrous storm of frost tore across the battlefield, forcing even the human hunters to retreat under Lim Tigu's command. Spears of ice rained down, driving the fragment into desperate dodges while Scyllid conjured an attack of apocalyptic scale. High above, an enormous glacier formed, swelling larger and larger until it blotted out the sky. With a roar, Scyllid vowed to bury both the fragment and the monarch inside an eternal void of ice. The fragment's eyes widened in horror as one of the frozen lances pierced him, severing his arm. He braced himself for the mountain of ice that was about to fall. But before it could strike, a shadow soldier leapt into the sky and shattered it in midair. Baru had returned, stronger than ever. From the ground, the Shadow Monarch emerged in his true form, shielding the fragment from harm. He looked upon Scyllid with scorn, declaring that one so weak had no right to assume the position of a king. Scyllid froze. His spell had broken. The commander-ranked shadow soldiers had regained their strength, kneeling one by one before their master. Jin Wu stepped forth from his armor, muttering that this was why prophecies could not be trusted. His gaze swept the field. "Did the beast monarch flee?" he asked. Scyllid's expression betrayed the answer. Jin Wu's tone hardened. "Who dares to leave without my permission?" Terrified, Scyllid could only tremble. Before his eyes, a vast dome of darkness swelled outward from Jin Wu, engulfing the battlefield. It expanded so massively that it was visible from space, swallowing nearly half the earth beneath its shadow. When the field finally stabilized, Jin Wu whispered that he had found his quarry. Scyllid thought him distracted and seized what he believed was his only chance. Gathering every ounce of mana, he hurled his trident in a desperate strike meant to end everything in one blow. But Jin Wu caught the weapon with a single hand and crushed it into shards. Scyllid stood in disbelief, unable to comprehend the gulf between their powers. This was the true might of the Shadow Monarch. Yet instead of finishing him then and there, Jin Wu simply told him to wait. He would deal with him later, after he was finished with the beast. Deep inside the forest, a portal opened, and the beast monarch Rakan stepped through. He felt an oppressive aura of death closing in, and chastised himself for wasting time arguing with the frost monarch Scyllid. That delay had forced his retreat too late. Rakan resolved to hide until the Dragon King returned. As he plotted his next move, a shadow fell behind him. He spun around alarmed. The sensation confirmed his worst fear. The aura was unmistakable. Frozen by terror, he sank to his knees. From his battle instincts came another realization. The scent of death was suffocating. He could neither stand and fight nor flee. He bowed his head, admitting the truth to himself. The gap in strength was hopeless. Humbling himself, the King of Beasts pleaded to Sung Jin Wu, asking forgiveness for his past sins and begging to be accepted as an ally. He promised that when the Dragon King descended with his army, he and his beast legions would aid Jin Wu. Jin Wu agreed to spare him. Privately, Rakan allowed himself a smug thought. He believed Jin Wu had fallen for the ruse. Rakan convinced himself the monarch before him was not the true force. If Jin Wu truly were the Shadow Monarch, there was no way he would forgive a betrayer, especially one who had tried to kill his vessel. Confident that the human's mercy had bought him time, Rakan planned to wait for the Dragon King and vowed that when that day came, he would tear Jin Wu's corpse apart. Outwardly, however, Rakan declared loyalty and pledged to serve. Jin Wu accepted the pledge but set a condition. He still bore 5 scars from Rakan's claws, and if Rakan could survive 5 of Jin Wu's attacks, then Jin Wu would grant forgiveness. Rakan's composed mask shattered. Enraged, he unleashed his full form and roared, refusing to be mocked. Even if he died, he vowed, Jin Wu would not walk away unscathed. Towering in monstrous form, Rakan charged. Jin Wu drew a dagger and moved like a streak of light, flashing past Rakan in an instant. Rakan barely registered the movement until warm blood began to drip, and he realized a limb had been severed. Calmly, Jin Wu informed him that 4 strikes remained. Back in Korea, Baru carefully tended to the wounded hunters, channeling his healing energy to stabilize them. Watching from above, the frost monarch Scyllid sneered. He cared nothing for the insect's compassion toward humans, but the presence of another shadow soldier troubled him deeply. From the darkness emerged a knight clad in black armor. Scyllid's eyes narrowed in recognition. It was Egress, the Knight of Death, one of the two wings of the Shadow Army. Scylla knew the danger. With their master restored, these soldiers could now unleash their full strength, regenerating endlessly so long as the Shadow Monarch's mana remained. Unlike them, Scylla had already exhausted much of his own mana and could not recover what he had used in his transformation. Landing before Igris, he issued a cold warning. "Don't waste your time with something meaningless. Do you really think you can stand against me?" Igris did not answer. Instead, he silently drove his sword into the ground. From the depths of his cloak, a familiar figure began to emerge. Jin Wu stepped forward, tossing two bloody beast fangs onto the battlefield. His words cut through the frozen air. The beast monarch was dead. Scylla's eyes widened. To think that Jin Wu had slain the beast monarch in the short span he had been absent. Jin Wu's voice was resolute as he declared, "The plague monarch, the beast monarch, and the frost monarch. Your deaths will serve as a warning to all the others." Enraged, Scylla summoned shards of ice, preparing to strike. But before his attack could be released, two daggers pierced him, one driving deep into his chest, the other into his shoulder. Desperate, he tried to conjure what little mana he still possessed. Yet Jin Wu closed the distance instantly, seizing the frost monarch by the mouth and slashing him apart. His voice was like ice. "The beast monarch died on the fourth strike. I wonder, how many will it take for you?" Scylla screamed as his form collapsed. His monstrous body shattered, reverting to human shape before breaking apart into icy fragments that scattered on the wind. With the battlefield now silent, Jin Wu turned toward Baru. "Where is the man who was protecting me earlier?" Baru lowered his head. "He disappeared all of a sudden, my king." Elsewhere, that same man staggered away from the battlefield. His body was failing, his hand breaking apart into fragments of light. He understood the truth. This was the cost of wielding such power within a human vessel. Yet he accepted it calmly. This, he thought, was how it should end. A dagger suddenly landed in the ground beside him. He froze as a familiar voice reached his ears. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice if you slipped away?" Jinwoo stood before him. His words softened as he asked, "Why did you leave without saying a word?" Then, in a tone both heavy and tender, Jinwoo addressed him with a single word. "Father." The story shifted back to the dimensional prison where Sung Il-hwan had been trapped, and Il-hwan began to tell Jinwoo what had happened on that fateful day. He explained that after a party clears a dungeon boss, hunters must escape the gate within an hour. In his case, however, Il-hwan had been forced to remain inside the dimensional rift with no ordinary way out. At that moment, the rulers intervened. They lent him a portion of their strength and tasked him with stopping the monarchs, including the Shadow Monarch, whose birth was imminent. With no other choice, Il-hwan accepted the ruler's offer and returned to Earth as their emissary. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, and he confessed that he had ultimately failed. Although he realized that the gravest threat to humanity lay inside Jinwoo's body, he could only watch from afar and could not fully prevent the calamity. Over time, the ruler's priorities shifted. Their original aim had been to prevent the Shadow Monarch's full awakening, but they concluded that to halt the Monarch's plan, they might need the Shadow Monarch's own power. The brightest fragment of brilliant light eventually gave Il-hwan a new order: protect the Shadow Monarch. The rulers reasoned that only the Shadow Monarch's army could stand a chance against the Dragon Monarch, who would arrive before the ruler's forces. It was a desperate gamble, uncertain whether the Shadow Monarch would side with humans or monsters. In the end, the rulers received their answer, and that was why Il-hwan had aided Jin Wu. He had chosen the path the rulers set before him. Il-hwan admitted he had never wanted to reveal this side of himself. Hearing the confession, Jinwoo's eyes filled with tears. Il-hwan tentatively asked if Jinwoo had hated him. Jinwoo answered that he had at times and apologized. Jinwoo recalled his early days as a hunter. When death had been near and his only thought was getting back to his mother, resentment toward his father had been strongest. But so had longing. He asked his father if he had missed them. Overcome with emotion, Il-hwan replied that he had missed them constantly. Il-hwan told Jinwoo that even when he could not be seen, he took comfort simply in watching them from afar. He rose, embraced his son, and said that Jinwoo had grown well. Jinwoo then asked whether the rulers had controlled Il-hwan and planned to discard him afterward. Il-Huan explained that the rulers had given him a choice, and he had chosen to protect Jin Wu. He did not regret that choice. He said he wished only to speak a little longer and to stay, apologizing for not being a better father. After those words, Sung Il-Huan dissolved into the air, vanishing and leaving Jin Wu alone. Jin Wu let out a raw, anguished scream. The scene cut to his mother and sister. His mother, staring out the window, called to Jana and urged her that it was time to move, repeating through tears that they could leave now. Fueled by rage and loss, Jin Wu shouted at the remaining monarchs that they would surely pay for what had transpired. The Shadow Monarch's cry had echoed across the world. The day it shook the planet marked the true beginning of war. The episode ends here. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Thanks again for your support, and I'll see you next time.